lost Dave.
Oh well. Hi guys, how you guys doing today? For some reason, it looks like David's out. Something happened to him. Hey Benny, how you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Okay, man. Well,
What about
There he
now?
is.
there
There
you
we
go.
are.
Hey,
Oh, okay, all
hey,
right,
somebody,
all right.
somebody has to step it up as a filler.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Hey guys, you know what? We're grateful once again that we have Devin Hawks and Benny's going to do the introduction. But I don't know about you. I want to dive into this, man, immediately because last week, I mean, there was so much more, so many other questions that came in, and today we want to try to answer as many questions. We're honored to have you. But with that said, Benny, I know you have a couple of shout outs. Go ahead, brother.
Well, I want to encourage our audience to check out the following YouTube channels. They're a world of information. It's the Police and Fire Publishing channel, which is coming out with a lot of CDC material. The other one is the Prison Guard channel with Hector Bravo, outstanding stories and training by Hector. The other one is Hot Mic on the Line with Ariel Casillas and Danny Garcia. Those guys are on fire, man. Watch them. They're great guys to listen to. Here they're all true stories. No chismes, no makeup stuff, no misinformation. This man have walked the line among some of America's most dangerous men. So check them out. The other thing I have is one more thing. I also want to remind our listeners that yesterday marked the deadliest day in San Quentin's prison history. The year was 1971 when 3 guards and 3 prisoners were killed. Correctional officers Jerry Graham, age 39, Frank De Leon, age 44, and Paul Cracenes, age 52, were killed during the uprising. All of the guards had their throats slashed, and De Leon was also shot with a gun that was smuggled into the prison by an attorney. You know, a few months ago, David and I visited San Quentin, and we went to that memorial site inside San Quentin. It's known as the Garden Chapel, next to the Adjustment Center in San Quentin, and saw stones dedicated to all the correctional officers killed within the walls of the queue. So that's my shout out. Our guest today is Devin Hawks. We got him here again. Devin was a special agent with the California Department of Corrections Special Services Unit,
Hey,
Gang
hey, Benny,
Intelligence Operations.
Benny, real quick, Devin, it looks like it's your whatever you did last week. It looks like it's your microphone again, Devin, because I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and then that noise is going to stop. See, it stopped. So whatever you have, Devin, if you don't mind, just re-logging back in like we did last week, because
Okay.
we're getting feedback from your microphone. Thank you, Seamus, for bringing that to our attention. If you don't mind, just re-logging back in real quick. That'd be
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's him.
And guys, while he's logging in, Louise, welcome to the show. Home 24/17. Welcome, Boris, Art of Survival. Thank you for once again being on the show with us. Seamus Donahue, once again, brother. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, real quick, like since we have time, and I just remembered a shout out to all the Imperial Irrigation District electrical, those power workers, the linemen. They did a really good job during Hillary. Our county and Rivers, we cover also part of Riverside County, had a lot of poles go down. Right before Hillary got here, we lost some poles in Winter Haven, and they got it up. They got the electricity back on. And over there in the Coachella Valley, they also lost a lot. And then in between the cities, we had a lot of power outages. But you know, these guys are an excellent team, and so shout out to the IID linemen that were working, and the people that were working the emergency operations center, the EOC in their county too.
Excellent. All right, Benny, it's all yours. It's fixed.
Okay, so let's go start with the intro again on Devin's. He's back again with us again. Devin was a special agent with the California Department of Corrections Special Services Unit, Gang Intelligence Operations. Devin retired from CDC in 2011. Devin has debriefed numerous high-profile criminals and prison gang members. Today, we're going to talk about Operation Black Widow and the Nuestra Familia prison gang members. Welcome to the show, Devin.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you all.
So let's start with question number one, Devin. Who is Nuestra Familia, and what is the difference between the Nuestra Familia and the Northern structure? And what is the difference between the Norteño structure compared to Norteños?
Well,
I
first
know
of
it's a loaded question.
no, it's okay. First of all, the Nuestra Familia started in September of 1968 at San Quentin. It actually formed out of another secret society that operated opposite of the Mexican mafia known as La M. And the NF attacked the Mexican mafia after several attacks that had been against them. And so they started off under a different type of leadership. But then when the general, they formed a military-like structure, and then the general, Babo Sosa, took over, and they became the most organized prison gang out of all the prison gangs in California. Again, they had that military-like structure. They set up regiments throughout California. Now, all this happened before there was a Norteño and a Sureño. There were both the Mexican Mafia and the Nuestra Familia drew their numbers from all over the state of California, as well as from other states. The NF even had a member from New York. And so they, in the beginning, they didn't have Norteños and Sureños. That came later. As the Mexican Mafia and the Nuestra Familia began to attack one another, they did eventually develop a division in California. But in the beginning, the NF had regiments in Pomona, San Diego, Chino, Oxnard, areas of Southern California that have since changed their allegiance and loyalty to the Mexican Mafia. So the Nuestra Familia went through a RICO indictment back in the early 1980s, and the general, as well as many of the captains, ended up indicted in that racketeering prosecution. One of the captains who did not get indicted was a man by the name of Black Bob Robert Vasquez. And he actually led a faction against the general and usurped him, impeached him, and took over as the new general. He recognized that it was not good for the gang to be led by one person. And so they established what's called a mesa, a triumvirate of three leaders. And they acted as the head of the gang, these three leaders. One of them, ironically, was the brother of Babo Sosa. And so these three leaders took over. Black Bob Vasquez left, not left the gang, but he paroled and kind of just became inactive. They, as a mesa, decided they were going to do away with the military structure. No more captains and lieutenants and soldiers. Instead, they set up what's called a category system. Category 1 being the lowest, Category 3 being the highest. Your Category 1 were your new recruits or prospects. Category 3 were your local leaders, the more seasoned members of the gang. And then, of course, the top mesa were also considered Category 3. Now, after that RICO, where a lot of their members and leaders ended up targeted by prosecution, they decided to form a new gang. The northern structure is what we called it. They called it the Nuestra Raza. And they set them up also as a category system 1 through 3. This sub-gang was like a farm team for them. I guess in terms of baseball, your Major League Baseball team would be the Nuestra Familia. And then the farm team would be the Nuestra Raza. And they would use them as their soldiers to do all their activity. And that way they wouldn't get indicted anymore. At least that's what they thought. So they used this Nuestra Raza. They had NF members running it. They created rules called the bonds. They had their mission statement called the format, and they had their structure. And these guys were going to be their soldiers to do all their activity and remove them. I see someone put the name Manos. As I mentioned with that mesa, there were 3 people. Manos Sosa was that brother of Babo Sosa that I mentioned. Anyway, it didn't last very long. The entire Mesa ended up leaving the gang. And so a new Mesa had just formed when we opened up Pelican Bay. And we ended up with the entire leadership of the NF, as well as most of the membership. So that's kind of how it started. The Norteños were mostly your street gang members that operated out there, and they would be the people recruited into the Nuestra Raza.
Okay.
I guess we'll go with that for right now. We'll
So
cover
Devan,
more later.
Devin, can you tell us about this paramilitary structure the NF had at one time? In other words, what's a street regiment? Who runs it? How do they exist in prison? And who runs them on the street? Is it a member, or is it like in the Army? You know, they got somebody else, like a señora, taking care of it. I mean, how does it run?
Well, it does have to be a member who runs a regiment. When they set up their street regiments, that didn't go away with the new structure that they came up with. It would normally be a member of the Nuestra Familia. In the early days, it would usually be a captain. But after they changed to their new structure, any NF member who went out to an area like San Jose or Fresno or Stockton, they would take over that city for the gang, and usually, again, it would have to be an NF member. In 1990, we had just been opened a few months, and some of those NF members were already paroling out to the streets. And one of the missions was to set up and reorganize the regiments on the streets. So the NF member would go out there, take control, set up with the other NF members or Nuestra Raza members, and then they would commit their crimes. And I didn't mention the bank. The bank was very important to them. Each regiment was responsible for making money and contributing to the bank. There was the bank of the organization, and there was the bank for the regiment. They do still operate with the regiments. They aren't really called regiments inside the prison. Each prison facility had its own leadership. If there wasn't an NF member present, they would take a high-ranking Nuestra Raza member to direct the gang activities.
Hey,
So
Devin,
looks like they follow chain of command, huh?
Yeah, they established, probably out of all the gangs, the best chain of command. The others were kind of loose in their leadership. They had a education too. That was very important to them. They trained their members. They had to pass through essays and learn their history, learn about their enemies, learn their tactics for how to assault, how to make money. They were trained. Everyone had to have that training, and based on that training, they could move up in the organization. Amongst the Nuestra Raza, they appointed those who learned the material well. They appointed them as Nuestra Raza teachers.
Devin, did they have the same structure that the Mexican Mafia has, where they were taxing the barrios up north and they were paying a monthly or weekly stipend to the NF?
Not as structured as the Mexican Mafia had it. The Mexican Mafia has more street gangs operating under their control. A place like San Jose, for example, has a number of gang neighborhoods, but they just don't have that system set up as well as the Mexican Mafia for taxing. They do taxing, and they make a lot of their money through selling drugs, but it's not at the level that the Mexican Mafia does.
Go ahead, Chano.
Yeah, wow. I'm taking all that in. I mean, these guys are running business. They're educated in a way on how to run a business. Um, Very impressive. Hey, Devin. So we know that you've been retired for some time now, but do you know what the current NF structure looks like today?
Well, I could go through the changes that happened, um, especially at Pelican Bay, and how this happened to change with the federal prison system. Um, Again, at Pelican Bay, we started with that Mesa, the new Mesa, after the others had left. But then they ended up with another RICO indictment. Also in San Jose, there was a prosecution in which some of the leadership was targeted. But in Operation Black Widow, they ended up targeting the entire uh, leadership, the whole Mesa and all of the people under them. So the NF ended up reorganizing, and they established what are called generals, kind of the mixture of that military rank and the category rank. They kind of brought it all together, and they had three generals instead to run the organization. Um, and then underneath those generals was an inner council. Operation Black Widow targeted them, and those all three generals ended up getting indicted, and pretty much most of the inner council got indicted. They were going to go to the federal system, and they could see the writing on the wall. Uh, they didn't really have the power in the federal system, and so they had to reorganize. One of the things um, that happened was they started to make a deal that they would plead guilty if they all could go together to the federal system. Now, Governor Schwarzenegger had to get involved, and he worked with U.S. Attorney Robert Mueller, and they came to an agreement that Governor Schwarzenegger would commute all the life sentences that these NF leaders had in California, and they would accept their guilt for the crimes and accept a life sentence inside the federal system. Part of the deal with Governor Schwarzenegger was that these NF leaders would be spread throughout the country, not to be together, not to conspire, not to organize. But what happened, and Schwarzenegger became very upset by this, they took them all and they put them at the maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado, the ADX. And so it kind of defeated the deal. But then that also created new problems for the NF. At Pelican Bay, the NF had to reorganize, appoint new generals, get a new inner council. And in the feds, they kind of kept their same structure. But they also tried to keep control over California. And the new leadership at Pelican Bay said to the federal NF, you don't have any say on what goes on in California. That is our responsibility. You can have anywhere else in the United States or wherever, you have control over all that, but we control the state of California. One of those generals was David Cervantes, and he ended up demoting the other two generals down to a category 1. So basically, he usurped the other generals and he became the sole leader of the NF. Now, I want to talk just briefly about those three general positions. One was called the General over Prisons, General of Prisons, or Pintas is what they called him. And that general was responsible for all of the activities inside the prisons. Then there was the general, the street regiment general, and that was the general who controlled all the street regiments. So he had his regiment leaders out there, and they reported to him. Then there was the General Advocate Office. And this was kind of like the JAG of the NF.
Wow.
They did the internal investigations, resolve conflicts. If there were policy decisions to make, usually the General Advocate Office would be involved. And so they had their duties, but then they all had equal authority as generals. So again, they went into the feds and ended up reorganizing at Pelican Bay. But now there's a new problem because the indictments didn't stop against the NF. All the new NF leaders ended up getting indicted. The entire generals and inner council. And that happened more recently in Operation Quiet Storm. So now these NF leaders are looking to go to the feds. And that will put them underneath the leadership that they usurped, the ones that are very unhappy with them. So we are still waiting to see what happens on all that situation. They really don't want to go to the feds. For example, DC Cervantes, he really doesn't want to go because he's going to have to answer to the people that he took command from. So anyway, that's kind of where it's at right now.
Wow.
Hey, Devan, we have a comment from Seamus Donahue. Julia Reynolds wrote in Blood in the Fields that Operation Black Widow was a giant nothing burger in terms of its outcome. Would you agree?
Well, I think Operation Black Widow did one thing, and that was to upset the leadership. It did take several top NF members. They ended up becoming prosecution witnesses. They also left the gang. I think that's significant. One of those were the top Mesa, and he ended up leaving. In San Jose, with that case, two people who were in charge of the regiment ended up leaving. So when you look at a case, one of the things that we're looking for is to stop the gang activity. Well, the NF continued under new leadership, but that also meant that some people stopped. And by the way, in that book, Robert Grattan was one of the main people in that book, and he was one of those in charge of a street regiment, and he has since passed away.
Home 2417 has a question. Can you tell us about the fight between Big Smiley and Pantera?
Well, Pelican Bay Security Housing Unit had two different facilities. There was Facility C and Facility D. Both Big Smiley, Art Ramirez, and Panther, Pablo Pina, they were looking to be in the top leadership of the gang. So during that transition between the Mesa and the new generals, there were people who were trying to get into that leadership. And so there was a conflict between Art Ramirez, who was from Salinas, and Pablo Pina, who was from San Jose. Pablo was in D facility, where a lot of your NF leadership was over in C facility. And at one point, the NF leadership in C facility, who were the ones who took over, they were even talking about targeting Pina for assault.
Go ahead, Chalo.
Hey, so let's get rolling here because I don't want to run out of time. Hey, tell us, and let me just listen to this question first. So tell us about Operation Black Widow. But before Black Widow, I understand in July of 1985 there was an indictment on members and associates of the NF in Santa Clara County. What can you tell us about both cases? And we understand here that the NF threatened the DAs in the Santa Clara case.
Okay, in the Santa Clara case, That was 1990, 1991 is when the activity happened. So like I mentioned, there were several NF members who ended up rolling out of Pelican Bay and going to San Jose. They had orders to set up the regiment, reorganize it, get the people working and making money, and to take care of people who were targeted by the gang to be killed. During that time, they had several leadership changes in the regiment. They murdered quite a few people. I want to say even up to 10 people. One of the main guys out there doing the killing was the regiment leader, Lucky Ronald Shelton. He ended up making a deal with the prosecution and testifying against the other defendants. He pled to, I think, 4 murders, and so he ended up with a life sentence. He didn't want to get the death penalty, and the others were looking at the death penalty in the prosecution. At least 3 of the 4 were. As these guys would do the murders, they would write in to the NF leadership and report about those murders. Now, they couldn't just say it directly because they knew that we were reading the letters. So they used code. The second in charge under Lucky Shelton was a guy by the name of Bobby Lopez, known as Silent. And people made fun of that because he was everything but silent. In code, he wrote, after they killed Little Weasel, Tony Herrera, he wrote, "Little Weasel is peddling daisies." His girlfriend, Sheila Apodaca, they were afraid that she was going to tell the cops about what they were doing about their murders. So they killed her as well. And they killed another guy that was involved with their organization called Chocolate, Ray Perez. And Bobby Lopez wrote in to the NF leadership and said, Rambo did a move, his leading lady, and then the other was a player, and he was reporting about those 2 murders. I ended up going down and testifying in the Santa Clara County case. The case was being prosecuted by married assistant district attorneys, Charles and Catherine Constantinides, Catherine known as Kitty. And they did a great job prosecuting these 4 people, Bobby Lopez, James Trujecki, known as Huevo, Spankio Herminio Serna, and another guy named Pájaro, Edward Vargas. So the 3 were looking at death penalty. We didn't really have anyone on condemned row at San Quentin that were from the NF. And so that also was pretty significant. For Santa Clara County, this was the most expensive prosecution up to that time. I think it cost over $10 million. The case didn't actually, well, going back, I testified first before the grand jury, 1992. And I remember the day I testified was the day of the Rodney King verdict and the riots. San Jose erupted with all those riots and everything, as well as Los Angeles. Not, of course, at that level, but I remember having to be escorted out of the back door of the courthouse because of that verdict. But just to give you a timeline, 1992 was the grand jury. The case didn't actually go to prosecution until several years later, but they did finally get death penalty convictions on those 3. Since then, Spankio Herminio Serna has died while on death row, but the other 2 remain there at San Quentin. So now about the threat. So the assistant DAs were making public statements quite often about the case, about the activities of the Nuestra Familia, about Silent Bobby Lopez not being so silent. The NF became very angry with them over some of the comments they felt were disparaging. And so they actually put a hit out on both of the assistant DAs. That was never carried out, and both are still alive today, as far as I know.
Hey, real quick, like just for people who know the reference in $10 million back then in 92, 93, it equals around 21 to $22 million nowadays. That's how much it would cost inflation on a case. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. At the time, that was the most that Santa Clara had ever spent on a prosecution.
Hey, Devan, we got two quick questions. Drew Moore has a question. Was Cheyenne Cadena the only MM member that the NF killed? Was he the only NF member that, or MM member that the NF killed? Cheyenne Cadena?
As far as I know, that is a true statement. The NF killed Rodolfo Cadena, known as Cheyenne, at the California Institution for Men on December 17th or 19th of 1972. It was late December 1972. And there were several NF members who killed him. It was supposed to be during a time of peace talks. The Mexican Mafia were trying to, and the Nuestra Familia were trying to arrange a truce. But during that time, 2 NF members ended up getting assaulted, and they retaliated by killing the recognized leader or influential member, Rudolph Cadena.
Boris has a quick question. Mr. Hawks, do you know the difference between Nuestra Raza and Northern Riders, being as they are both Norteño organizations that are abbreviated as NR?
Yes, the Nuestra Raza is the gang that operates under the authority of the Nuestra Familia. Again, they are like the farm team. The Northern Riders do not recognize the leadership of the NF. They operate separate from the NF. Some of them are even dropouts, but they do not recognize themselves as being underneath the NF. I see here that my former boss, Robert Ayers, is asking a question. He was at the warden at Pelican Bay when Black Widow was going on. I appreciate the comment there. I will point out that at the time that Operation Black Widow actually took place, I had already gone to the Special Service Unit. Mr. Ayers had a great guy working for him up there, Mark Pyland, who was also doing a lot there with Black Widow. I was going over to San Francisco and working with the prosecution on Operation Black Widow. And we even used one of the main informants to come over and do a drug buy for me in Sacramento. So we did have interaction, and I was going to testify in that case, but the defendants ended up pleading guilty.
In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have Mr. Ayers. He's going to come on the show. We're looking forward to have him on the show.
He will
go
be
ahead.
a great guest for you.
We can't wait. Yes.
He was very supportive of the gang unit and was at the forefront of leading everything against gangs. We did a lot of innovative tactics, and he was behind some of that.
You know what? Sean's going to come on next. Question number 8. Before he comes on, Art of Survival. Welcome to the show. Was there any Asian Islanders who were NF or NR?
Yes, they recruited whites, they recruited blacks, they recruited Asians. Some of the early members of the NF as well as of the ME had Asian background.
Real quick, like, I mean, just to add something to that, and I'm sorry, Sean. I've noticed that in the Southern structure, maybe it's just me. I was never a a gang person. I mean, that was not my job when I was in law enforcement. But my question is, the southern the southern gang members and the northern gang members are real different, right? There, it looks like there's more. They have more factions of like Nuestra Familia, Nuestra Raza. They have all these. And here in Southern California, I know you have street gangs, but it looks like the MA runs south, right? Nuestra Familia has a lot of. I mean, you got a bunch of different gangs over there. Are they more united down here, or are they more united up in Northern California?
Well, yes, the Mexican mafia do run the Sureño gangs. Your Sureños, the gangs often use the number 13 to identify with the 13th letter of the alphabet, M for Mexican mafia. Your Norteño gangs use the number 14. Originally, that 14 was for the letter N for Nuestra Familia to show their allegiance there. But now, if you were to ask all these Norteño gangs out there, well, what does 14 mean? They would try to tell you it just means Norteño, N for Norteño. But that isn't how it really is set up. There are more Sureño gangs. These gangs have become more transnational as people have moved throughout the nation as well as internationally. So we now have Crips, Bloods, Sureños, Norteños all over. And you could go to about every major city and find Sureños and Norteños. They aren't divided in California anymore. You will find a lot of Sureño gangs in Northern California. Every major city has Sureño gangs. When I was working in Sacramento, there was the 47th Street gang. San Jose has a number of Sureño gangs working there. Fresno has Sureño gangs. So they're all over the place now. And they aren't really divided by territory.
Go ahead, Big Sean.
Hey, Devan, you mentioned a couple of guys earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about Robert Babo Sosa and Robert Brown Bob Viramontes?
Okay, Babo Robert Sosa, like I said, was the first general under the military rank structure back in 1978, 79, 1980, and then he ended up getting indicted in the RICO case. Babo did end up having his own faction, but it was small of his loyal followers compared to what Black Bob Vasquez had. Babo Sosa, his group ended up dropping out or getting assaulted, and Babo Sosa himself later dropped out, and then he has since passed away. Brown Bob Viramontes was one of the Mesa leaders at Pelican Bay after we opened. And I had several meetings with him. I took pictures of his tattoos. One of the pictures I took of his Nuestra Familia there on his back is used by a lot of law enforcement presentations. Brown Bob ended up paroling out of Pelican Bay and kind of went inactive while he was living in Campbell. The NF actually came after him because he still tried to have his part in politics. And they said, you know what, you aren't at Pelican Bay, you're not in the leadership anymore. They actually sent an NF hit team after him, and they murdered him in his garage in 1999.
How about
Death Row Joe Gonzalez?
Yeah.
Death Row Joe Gonzalez was one of the captains of the NF. This was back before the RICO indictment. During the RICO indictment of the 1981-82, two main captains, Art the Rock Beltran and Death Row Joe Gonzalez, ended up pleading guilty and becoming informants. actually contributing quite a bit to that prosecution.
How about James Tibbs Morado?
Tibbs Morado was your general advocate office under that formation. I had the opportunity of being the caseworker of the entire NF leadership, all the generals, when I was working at Pelican Bay. Tibbs, very interesting guy. Smart, kind of revolutionary. At times, he seemed like he was not always there. Very violent. He ended up getting indicted under Operation Black Widow and ended up going over to the feds. While he was there, he started to associate with the shoe bomber and converted to Islam. The NF did not take well to him, and Tibbs Morado was killed by Kwete Gerald Rubalcaba, another NF member who was indicted in that Operation Black Widow.
One of the viewers mentioned the Fresno Bulldogs. Do they align with the NF? And was there ever a Bulldog task force assembled?
So the Fresno Bulldogs, first of all, they were just the Fresno Regiment of the NF at one point, but then several NF members from Fresno ended up dropping out. And once they became targets of the NF, they were well respected in Fresno, and Fresno became its own faction, and they became targeted by the NF. They adopted the Bulldog later because that's the mascot of the university there in Fresno State. And they are actually enemies of the NF. At one point, there was a Mexican mafia member from Fresno named Alfonso Palomino, and he had a nephew who was a member of the Bulldogs. And nephew or son, anyway, they ended up doing some negotiation, and they said, why don't you bring the Fresno Bulldogs under the umbrella of the Mexican mafia? And so they tried this, because at one point the Fresno Bulldogs were a gang that had nowhere that we could put them. The Mexican mafia were assaulting them. The Nuestra Familia were assaulting them, which meant the Sureños and the Norteños were assaulting them. So we didn't really have a place that we could put the Bulldogs. But when they started to negotiate with the Mexican mafia, the mafia said, okay, we'll bring you in. You're going to be comrades just like the Sureños. Well, that didn't last very long, because the Sureños tried to control them, and they ended up on the outs again. So the Fresno Bulldogs are their own group. They aren't accepted by the Mexican mafia or the Nuestra Familia. And there are thousands of them. So a task force was put together in the Fresno area, multi-agency, and they focused on arresting these Bulldogs and stopping their criminal activity. And they were very successful for years, capturing quite a few of these Fresno Bulldog gang members. I think they made a significant impact on the gang.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Hey, Devan. So, I mean, you already mentioned this, but just there are Sureño gangs that operate in Northern California, and you said that there were some, all over the place, right? The Sureño gangs. So I just want to make sure that we got in, that in. So here's my question for you. So what can you tell us about the Sur Santos Pride Gang? Who are they? Where are they from? And who do they align with?
So the Sur Santos Pride Gang is an example of one of those street gangs in San Jose. There are several Sureño gangs, but the Sur Santos Pride Gang, their leadership ended up kind of taking a leadership over all the Sureño gangs because they had the connections to the Mexican mafia members in the prison. So they were actually operating directly under supervision of Mexican mafia. The Mexican mafia was getting them their drugs. They were out there taxing, they were selling, they were robbing, extorting, they were killing. The Suero Santos Pride Gang operated for a while, but then they ended up getting indicted. Their top leadership, as well as several of their members, ended up going to prison for a number of crimes. But they still are out there, as well as several other Sureño gangs whom they were working with.
Hey, Devin, I have a quick question. You know, we talked about the Sureños being in Northern California. I mean, they're literally in San Jose. They're in all the neighborhoods over there, all the little cities. You got Sureños over there. Does anybody have any documented Norteños living in Southern California?
Well, I know that the Nuestra Raza has recruited people from Southern California into their gang, but there aren't any street regiments that I'm aware of operating in Southern California. It's so well controlled by Mexican mafia through their Sureños that I don't think a Norteño gang would really be able to survive significantly in any of your Southern California communities. At one time, like I said, the NF did have street regiments. The Chino Sinners used to be an NF regiment. They're now a Sureño gang operating under Mexican mafia. The Colonia Chiques gang out of Oxnard, many of them were also Nuestra Familia members. They also have switched allegiance to the Mexican mafia. San Diego had a regiment. The Sosas, there were three brothers, Julio, Michael, and Robert, all NF members. They were down in San Diego. But San Diego is really a Mexican mafia stronghold now. I don't think that you could ever get a regiment going that would be able to establish itself in an area like that.
You know, we have a good question from, and I'm going to go ahead and put this up real quick, from Ricardo Lopez. I found that interesting. I think if anybody knows that answer, I think you probably do. It says, Ricardo Lopez, I have heard that Huelga bird head is supposed to face a certain direction. Any truth to that? And that's the bird.
Well, I haven't heard about the face of the eagle's head. I can tell you a little bit about it. Because of the NF's, most of them came from migrant farmer families, and the United Farm Workers had a big movement in that area. As you know, most of Northern California is agricultural. And the United Farm Worker eagle was adopted by the Nuestra Raza as a symbol for them. And they even have education about all these different steps, what they mean for the Nuestra Raza of the UFW type eagle. It's called the Huelga bird. Huelga means strike because the United Farm Workers would strike. But again, it is a symbol of the Nuestra Raza, but I'm not sure exactly about the direction of the head. I don't remember seeing that in their material.
Question real quick from Southern 82. What about the Black Angels? Were they also involved with the Nuestra Familia at one time? That's Ontario Black Angels.
Ontario Black Angels, of course, they are definitely a Mexican mafia controlled gang. Their top members were members of the Mexican mafia, people like Tupi Hernandez and Daryl Castrohone, Turtle Baisa. These are all people out of the Black Angels gang, Mondo Barajas. Way back then, I think there was a unit in Ontario, a regiment, but I can't think of really many NF back in the old days who were from Ontario. There were probably a couple of them, but not today. There aren't any NF members from Ontario. Surprisingly, on your top leadership, Pinky Hernandez is from Rancho Cucamonga. You have Vincent Arroyo, who was on the Mesa. He was from the Chino area. DC David Cervantes was from Chino. We're talking about people who were in the leadership during the 1990s up to current, some of them current.
Go ahead, Benny.
Hey, Devin, I was checking a photo of myself during the Cesar Chavez riots at the Imperial Valley, and I am holding one of those flags, and they're the same. The head on the eagle is the same as the one from the NF. It's pointed in the right direction, same direction.
Well, because they call it the Welga bird or Welga eagle, I think they probably will consider that as their symbol, the way that it was created by the United Farm Worker. And again, one of the nicknames told to the NF is Farmeros, kind of a corruption of English and Spanish together to identify them as farmers.
Yes.
Hey, Seamus, I agree with you. Ontario Airport, best airport in Southern California. It's a secret. Please don't tell anybody. Whenever I fly to Southern Cal, that's where I fly, man. It's a great airport. Excellent customer service.
It is.
Benny, go ahead, brother.
I already did. I already asked the question. Oh,
About
you're
the
talking
Border
about number 13?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Devin, I was going to ask you about the Border Brothers. Who do they align with? Do they align with the NF, Norteños? And how do they align in federal prisons too?
Well, the term Border Brothers has two different meanings. One, there is an actual gang called Border Brothers, and they started out of Tijuana and gained a lot of support along California, Arizona, and they actually operate today in the thousands. Then there's also the term Border Brothers that is just kind of applied to Latin American nationals, mostly Mexican nationals. In this case, we see this tattoo, this picture that has BB. I would say that's probably more of someone who belongs to the gang Border Brothers. They don't operate under the Mexican Mafia or the gang itself or under the Nuestra Familia. They are their own gang, and they have very close ties to Mexican drug cartels. But your Mexican nationals, they end up joining Sureño gangs. A lot of 18th Street gang members are from Central America and Mexico. Your Mara Salvatrucha, those operate under the Mexican Mafia. Your Fifth and Hill, a lot of your Los Angeles gangs, a lot of your San Diego gangs. There are a large number of them who are nationals. And of course, most of them align with gangs that are affiliated with the Mexican Mafia. But you go into Northern California, and some of those who join your gangs could be Salinas East Market Street, or the 47th Street out of Sacramento, or El Hoyo Palmas out of San Jose. Then, of course, because of that street gang connection, their allegiance would be to the Nuestra Familia.
What about, there's a question from JC. Good question. There's a lot of MS-13 here in Virginia. Does MS-13 align with the NF in the federal prisons and state prisons, or there's no alliance between them?
Now, this is very interesting too. More recent development are the negotiations that the MS-13 is having with Nuestra Familia. Of course, 13 again, it represents the 13th letter of the alphabet, M for Mexican Mafia. But the MS-13 is so large, and really their top leadership is in El Salvador, and they are trying to control them. But the Mexican Mafia also has such heavy control because of the Sureño street gangs in California. These MS-13 is spread throughout not just the United States, but also into Canada and Central America. And as they are getting placed in federal prison, they're trying to figure out how to align. Some of them have tried to align with the Mexican Mafia there at ADX, but then there are those who are trying to negotiate with the Nuestra Familia. So at this point, there is not that connection established with the NF.
You know, Devan, going back to Benny's question, which is a great question about Border Brothers, who they align with. Have you, I mean, today we have Mexican drug cartels. We've always had them, but never like today. I mean, we have a narco terrorist group working out of Mexico in the United States. Do you see these Border Brothers having more power than ever before? And do you see these prison gang members reaching out to them so they could get their connection, their dope connection, whether it's Sinaloa, Guadalajara, Noroeste, or Michoacan?
Well, what we see are your Mexican Mafia reaching out directly to the cartels, trying to establish connections and have that direct access to the drugs, using their street gangs to sell those drugs and distribute them throughout. But and just giving you some examples, the Mexican Mafia's connection with the Ariano Felix organization back in the 90s, and then even going up into the late 90s, early 2000s, that was very big for them. But they also had Fox, a guy by the name of Landa. We had him in our system as Alejandro Tapia. He was going down and dealing directly with cartels for the Mexican Mafia. That's kind of the big thing, is if you can establish that direct connection with the cartel, you cut out the middle people and there's more money to be made. All along the border in Texas, in Arizona, New Mexico, these street gangs are dealing directly with the Mexican drug cartels on the other side. And they are getting the drugs, and then they are distributing them throughout the United States. Fentanyl being one of the main drugs being distributed now. But they have tunnels. The Sinaloa cartel was digging tunnels all over from Mexico into California. Law enforcement had to put together the tunnel task force to go out and actually locate tunnels and crush them. Chinese nationals were being smuggled through those tunnels into California. So this is a big deal with the cartels. One of the biggest threats that we have right now to our national security, and primarily through the distribution of drugs. It's the future.
I was involved in one of the 4 tunnels that we found throughout my career here in Imperial County in Calexico, and we actually wrote the search warrant on one of them because the feds. It was a Friday, and they couldn't get an AUSA, so they reached out to the locals. We were there on scene anyways, but we wrote the search warrant. We got a search warrant, went in there, we found the tunnel, and so I mean, like I said, we found 4. I was directly involved on one of the 4. But I mean, these tunnels are, I don't know, these guys are engineering masters because the way they came from Mexico, I mean, this is, I mean, we're talking about mid 2000s when we found that one. And the technology they had, I don't think they had the technology they have now here in the US. I mean, because even the the CBs came out here, the engineers, Army Corps engineers came out here, were trying to do sonar and radar and everything else to find these tunnels, and they couldn't. We found it. You know, it was just one of those. We had an informant, you know, kind of give us heads up, and we got that one. And then another one was actually found by a city crew. They were out there digging a pipe that broke, and I think it broke because of the tunnel that was being dug. And when they went out there, the backhoe sank into the tunnel. So that one was found. And we found another one in a house, and that one also was a neighbor calling Border Patrol and them and HSI telling them, hey, you know what? We get a lot of bodies running in there, running out of there, vans running out of there. So that one actually was dope and people that they were crossing. And then we had another one by our Grand Plaza, just west of Calexico, which Grand Plaza outlets actually there was a shopping mall that they had dug in there too. So I mean they're all over the place.
Yeah,
Hey, Devin,
Chapo Guzman was a main promoter of that. He brought in miners and had them work to dig those tunnels. These are people who know about digging tunnels.
excellent. Last question for tonight. Other than the gentleman, the part of the panel, if they have a question. Ray Hambre, welcome to the show, brother. True sheepdog. The questions for Cholo Trucker. As someone who has been involved in the Southern California street gang life, I know about gangs that don't align with the MA, but never heard of a gang from Southern Cal aligning with the NF. Is there any Southern California gangs aligning with the NF?
Again, not at this time. I don't think that a Norteño gang could survive in Southern California because of the amount of Sureño gangs that are there. There are some Sureño gangs right now who do not align with the Mexican Mafia. They've been green lighted by the Mexican Mafia. You have gangs like Maravilla, who has been targeted by the Mexican Mafia. Mexican Mafia they call them things like Marawiwi, you know, they give disparaging remarks to them and they target them for assault. And yet there are members of Maravilla who are members of the Mexican Mafia, but mostly those are from old times. And again, the Norteño gangs that did operate in Southern California, well, that was during the 1970s.
Hey, Devin, I'm surprised nobody asked this question, but I'm going to throw it out there. This is my last question. The NF and the Mexican Mafia formed a truce. According to the state chapters formed a truce, Norteños, Sureños. What is there truth behind that? We know that they're a criminal organization and there's no such thing as a truce. If anything, it's going to join them together to sell more drugs and to commit more murders. Is there truth behind that statement, that there is a truth between Norteños, Sureños, Nuestra Familia, and the Mexican Mafia in the state of California?
I'm not aware of a truce right now, but again, I've been retired since 2011. I will tell you that over the years, they've talked about making a truce. The incident in 1972, Cheyenne Cadena, when he was down at Chino negotiating, the Department of Corrections tried to help promote that peace treaty by bringing these people together. It ended up being a bloodbath, and they blamed the Department of Corrections for it. At several times through the years, they've talked about doing peace treaties. At Pelican Bay in the year 2000, they talked about doing a peace treaty between the NF and the Mexican Mafia. Topo, Benjamin Peters, was one of those, him and Mike Eisen, known as Acha from the Mexican Mafia. They were talking to people like Smiley, Art Ramirez, and others, trying to come up with an arrangement to have a truce between their gangs. We told them, we will not get involved in your prison politics anymore. Every time that you guys decide you're going to do a truce, it ends up falling apart and we get blamed for it. You seem to communicate very well on your own. We aren't going to hurry that along. So ended up in 2000 that the prison did allow for people to talk. But again, they came to an understanding, but it was not really a peace treaty, a truce. Understanding of, hey, if we're out in the yard, the shoe yard, or out in the pod rather, at the same time, we won't attack each other. We'll just leave it at that. And that might have been an understanding that worked at Pelican Bay during a certain period of time, but it wasn't something that happened throughout the state.
Chalo, do you have any more questions for Devan?
No, I'm done.
Benny, any questions
Devan.
related to the
No,
subject matter?
not at all.
No? Sean?
Nope.
Anything?
No, it's a great show. Great show.
Hey, brother, once again, man, thank you very much, Devan. And we look forward, and we know you're coming back. I think Benny already has a date set up, and I guess he's working on the subject matter. But we're looking forward, brother. Thank you once again, man. You've been a big blessing. The information that you've shared has been outstanding. From the bottom of our heart, man. Mil gracias.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
Thank you,
much.
Devin. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Thank
David.
you again for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
It's
brother.
awesome.
God bless
Great
you.
show.
Right.
Wow.
Guys, man, talking about history, huh? A couple of gentlemen put in, well, we're going too fast. Well, we have to go fast because we don't have all night, but I'll tell you, man, just the information that Devan has, I mean, outstanding information, outstanding. Benny, tell us about next week. I'm excited. And you know what? I'm going to make sure, Benny, that I'm going to talk to Robert on Monday and on Sunday. And we're going to practice because
Every
we don't
day,
want to
every
mess it
day.
up again, brother. I'm excited about that. Tell us about it.
Well, we're getting Robert back, Robert Almonte. He's going to join us. If you remember, we experienced technical difficulties the last time, so we all decided to just delete the entire show and reschedule. Robert is a national expert in the occult and Mexican drug cartels. While working as a narcotics detective for the El Paso Police Department, he learned that the Mexican drug traffickers and gang members were praying for protection from law enforcement. They prayed to religious icons, I guess you can call them icons, or patron saints. Many of these traffickers utilize curanderos, brujos, brujas for guidance. Robert's going to discuss Jesus Valverde, Santa Muerte, San Simón, Juan Soldado, San Toribio, Romo, Niño de Atoche, and we're going to cover, believe it or not, we got to get into even a darker world, exorcisms.
Exorcism. I was about to tell you that. I remember him talking about that. Exorcism.
It's going to be an eye-opener. So.
Sacarte el diablo.
No. Saco el Sanabavish y lo quito el exorcismo.
No, I think we're scheduling a limpia for Chalo. Yeah, una limpia.
Que venga y me limpie la backyard también y todo.
Oh boy.
No, guys, you know what? We don't have time, Sean, for our current events, but we'll cover them next week. With that said, Chalo, last words.
Hey man, like I said, I always say it. To me, this is what kept us in our career for such a long time. Is integrity means everything, man. You got to have integrity in order to survive. And not only in law enforcement, but in life and business and everything, man. Integrity, your word is solid. So remember, integrity, can't beat it.
Exactly. Benny?
Well, it's same as always. Those working that thin blue line and putting their lives at risk, prepare for the fight of your life, man. Fight dirty, get tough and mean. Train, know the job. The job is dangerous, man. But don't hesitate. Remember, hesitation kills. Remember the deadly errors of others. Don't miss those danger signs. Stay in the fight and survive. Never give up. Remember, experience comes from all of our mistakes.
Exactly. Big Sean?
Same as always, man. Live tactically and just be safe and watch your back.
And don't forget, live a purpose-driven life. You're never too old or too young to volunteer. You're never too old or too young, and you don't need a badge or you don't need a uniform to continue saving lives. Make a difference. Live every day like it's your last day on earth. Thank you. God bless you. We'll see you next week. It's going to be a great show. Please tell your friends and to log on. It's going to be an outstanding show. Thank you.